Dámy a pánové, tady je Sara Polak a vítám vás u dalšího dílu Pioneer Talks. Já vždycky říkám, že mám radost z našeho hosta, ale dneska mám opravdu radost, protože ono je to fajn, když můžeme využít tento díl k tomu, abych si popovídala s kamarádem. Takže je to krásné, já se na to moc těším. Zároveň teďka přepnu do angličtiny, protože chceme, aby se náš message o propojení kultury a technologií dostal mezi co nejvíce lidí, tak please excuse me for switching into English now. And it's my absolute honor to welcome William Rudolf Lobkowicz from the House of Lobkowicz. Welcome to our humble studio with extremely effective foliage.
Thank you very much. Loving the foliage as well.
Thank you. Will, maybe you have been doing amazing things with the House of Lobkowicz, really pushing the envelope regarding technology and kind of like bringing your story to life. But maybe for those of you, there won't be many of you who don't know you, if you could just set yourself in context, kind of like where you come from and what you do and what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Well, when we say the House of Lobkowicz, it really represents an overarching organization that is responsible for managing 5 historical sites, including the Lobkowicz Palace in Prague Castle, Nelehozoves Castle, the Antonín Dvořák Birth House, also in Nelehozoves, which will be opening in April of 2024, which we're very excited for, Rodnice Castle, and Střechov Castle. But a part of that responsibility is also for the collections that have been collected over 700 years of patronage in our family's history, which include 20,000 movable objects, 1.5 kilometers of archival material, 2.5 kilometers of library material, and paintings by Bruegel, Velázquez, Canaletto, Cranach, hand-annotated musical manuscripts by Mozart and Beethoven. And our goal as an organization is really to find ways to share the past so that we inspire others to create the future, not just have a wonderful painting displayed and put up on a wall, but find different ways for people to connect with that art and be inspired in different ways, whether you be someone who's from an artistic background or a musical background. And in that vein, we really are trying to tell incredible stories that can hopefully inspire people in the future as well.
Yeah. Nice. I mean, one of the reasons why I love and admire what you do so much is because I used to work in the museum sector, and I used to be a director of a startup for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Bearing in mind I was the only employee, and that's how startups big themselves up. They just give you the stamp of director, and you feel very important.
Very typical.
But I had the pleasure of basically I just used it as an opportunity to go into all the exhibitions that I possibly could, and it was interesting to see that a lot of museums kind of work from momentum, like that. Like you have the space that was given to you in the 17th, 18th century, and you do it because it's tradition to do it. And one of the reasons why I love what you do is that for you, it's like a family history as well. Like it's your life. It's something that your ancestors have collected, and also it's something that you feel very passionate about sharing regarding the stories and regarding the importance of culture for everyday life. So,
but I will say with the family though, as much everyone still always says this too. There's a link to the family, absolutely, and there's definitely a responsibility that I feel from our ancestors. But we really don't see this as just protecting a family collection, because the culture that's been accumulated over these years is not just our history, it's Czech history, it's world history, and something that can be shared with a larger group of people. But sorry, I interrupted your question.
Oh, no, not at all. I basically go on rants. I mean, you know this. Yes. like streams of consciousness with a vague kind of like twist of ADHD. But what I wanted to ask about is that, and it's a story you tell so beautifully, it's not a given thing that those collections also stay in one place and stay necessarily like in a good condition. I mean, the 20th century wasn't particularly kind to those 700 years of history of your family, right?
And it's interesting because this collection is quite unique in the sense that it's never been broken up in its 700-year history. There have been various periods of history that have taken place. You had the tumultuous 20th century, but you had the 30 Years' War that took place between 1618 and 1648. You had the wars of Prussian succession. You had the Napoleonic Wars that were happening. And throughout the course of the history, you had these various Lobkowicz princes that were adapting to the times they were living in. And today, I think a lot of our work, we're always thinking about how we can adapt to the times and the changes that are happening in our society, which is what has allowed our family to survive for over 700 years. So the tumultuous 20th century was obviously a very critical point for us because it's the most recent and the one that caused the most damage, I'd say, to the collections. We lost our collections twice and regained them twice. My great-grandfather was a great supporter of the First Republic in Czechoslovakia and was an outspoken critic of Adolf Hitler. And for that reason, he was put on Hitler's blacklist to be executed upon the annexation of Czechoslovakia, which fortunately did not happen. He left on the last train leaving Prague before the Nazis invaded and lived in London in exile, working for the Czechoslovak government in exile as ambassador to Czechoslovakia during the course of the Second World War. And then my grandfather and his two brothers were sent by way of Canada to the United States. And all of our properties were seized then. And that was an important moment for us as well. There was a lot of damage that took place. We came back in 1945 after the war, and then the communists took over in 1948, and once again the collections were seized. And so when we were living in exile in the United States, we really embraced, we were refugees, and we've always been told in life the three most important things in your life are your family, your faith, and your education, because those are the three things that can't be taken away from you. My grandmother is always quite a funny figure. She's from Kentucky. She married my grandfather, who came over as a Czechoslovak refugee. And she always says, all of this is just stuff. It's just stuff. They're things. And really what's important is that we as a family try to find a way to continue this heritage, and things will be lost along the way. Things might be partially damaged, but we'll continue in our mission to sort of preserve and protect these things so that we can share them with generations to come in the future.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. I remember I remember talking to your dad once, and we were talking about education. I was like, yeah, because no one can take that away from you. And we're like, yeah, high five, this is great, good values. And then I was talking to a particular friend of mine from the technological sector, and I was like, oh, isn't it great? Like, we've got the same values, and education's so important, and no one can take that away from you. And he's like, apart from Alzheimer's. I was like, okay, well, thank you very much for destroying my dreams. But you're absolutely right. But nonetheless, the stuff is very symbolic, and it also gives us a lot of really precious data to understand the past. One of the things and phrases you always use, which I really like, is that you're basically like the keepers, you're the curators of the stuff. You're not like
stewards.
Much better word, yes. And then trying to like Gollum kind of keep it for yourself. Right. You mentioned there's a lot of, for example, like undocumented materials. You've been doing a lot of digital reconstructions of like individual paintings. So there must have been really cool stories that have come out of getting that collection back and having another look at it.
Absolutely. I mean, what's amazing is that a lot of this collection hasn't been fully studied yet, and we're working with a lot of virgin material. And I never like thinking of history as a completely written down thing and it's said and done. History is a constantly evolving process where there are new documents that are discovered every day. Our interpretations of history change over time as well. There are political factors that change who actually writes how history is told. And this is where collections like these are so important. And in particular, our library and archive, which is still uncatalogued, contains 4 kilometers of material. And that has not been studied properly and fully since the 1930s. And we're still operating with a catalog that was created in 1933. So that entire collection needs to go through a cataloging process that will take 7 to 10 years. And we're looking at ways of utilizing technology to help us with this process as well. We've obviously been hearing a lot about uses of artificial intelligence to help us with, writing essays or whatever it may be, or putting together a CV. But there are also some very interesting ways to utilize this technology to support a better understanding of our history too, where we can take away some of the manual processes that are involved in the study of history that make it so difficult to get into this material too.
Yeah, what you talk about you mentioned a few moments back about adaptation, and I think I'm not sure, it's just like a hunch. I don't have any data to support this, but talking to a lot of the people from the cultural sector, they see technology as like a necessary evil, that it can take the kind of like je ne sais quoi of like the emotion out of the beauty of like studying all this material and the musty and dusty books. And when we were filming the previous episode about our expedition to Guatemala, I remember my mom telling me like, oh, doesn't it take the fun out of things, out of the exploring, that you have LiDAR and you know where you're going regarding like the lost cities or whatever that might be. And I was saying, no, like, assuredly, like, there's still a lot of, like, excitement when you're there amongst the jaguars, like, trust me. But it also, like, fundamentally, what Milan was saying is that most of the exploration is done in an office. Like, you go and, like, you verify that it's there and you gather, like, some raw data. But then you need the technology along with the kind of human power to actually get the conclusions from that data.
Yes.
The conclusion isn't just finding a pyramid. The conclusion is finding out what significance the pyramid had.
Yeah.
And you've been doing some amazing things regarding kind of like maybe the categorization of knowledge, but also kind of like making sure of its irrefutability and its like unchangedness regarding blockchain in this regard. It's not necessarily used for analysis, but it's used for a kind of better chronology and storytelling regarding like the individual pieces and their place within the collection and towards the outside world. So could you tell us a little bit about what you pioneered with blockchain, because you've done an amazing job there?
I wanted to touch upon one point before that, which was just about, you were mentioning how museums have different approaches to thinking about how they use technology and they see it as a necessary evil. And this is something that I discuss with other people in the museum industry all the time. And I think, especially as you were just describing with your own ventures, we shouldn't see technology as a necessary evil. It's a tool that's going to help us better understand our history and our culture.
Yeah.
And our approach to our uses of technology is it should help us have a better understanding of our history, and it should be additive rather than something that replaces a experience that you can have. So in our collections today, we in front of painting, we have Haymaking by Peter Bruegel the Elder, which is probably one of the most important paintings in our collection. We loaned it to the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna for a big expose on Bruegel, which took place in 2018. But we used the opportunity to utilize technology that the museum had at its disposal to do infrared and X-ray scans of the actual piece and take macro photography of it, which involved setting up a massive grid in front of the painting and taking 250 pictures in high resolution and stitching them together so that you could zoom in and see up to 2 millimeters on a massive screen all of the detail that went into this. And when you look at that painting today, it is physically impossible to see some of the detail that he used, Bruegel used with his hand to put that together. And that's where technology has the ability to show us what a master this man was and his ability to do really remarkable things. So that's been that's our approach to technology there. And then with blockchain, this has been something that's been quite interesting, where we base all of our activities in blockchain around historical precedents. And one thing that we find so interesting about it is the ability to track provenance history behind different pieces, so where things have passed over time. And very often, this is a huge issue in the art world. I'd spent some time working as an intern at Sotheby's in the Old Master Paintings department. And the thing that we had to do initially was we'd be handed a piece that we needed to do some sort of cataloging on. And we'd have to find every single piece of literature that's ever been written about it, find out exactly where it has been transferred over time. And you're relying upon different sources to actually do this, but there's no immutable ledger that actually proves that ownership history over time, that provenance history. And so what's so interesting about blockchain is the ability for us to track ownership histories on an immutable ledger. This isn't anything different. This is a concept that dates back to the time of Mesopotamia, when you had ledgers that proved ownership of different pieces of land. And what's interesting, if you were to represent this glass as an NFT, you would be able to actually track ownership history if you had those transfers of take place over time. So that was one way where we first became interested in this technology. We also looked at ways where we could we looked at another example where we have a receipt that was given to us by Beethoven, who had basically given a receipt saying that he had received his annuity from one of my ancestors for the patronage of his work. Now, the only proof that we had actually been patrons of Beethoven is that piece of paper.
Is it that receipt?
That receipt. So imagine, I mean, there's literature that's been written on this, but when we're trying to find the actual proof, the actual letter, which is that receipt, which has his own signature at the bottom, that's the proof. So if we lose that piece of paper, what happens? People can reinterpret history. It's a living thing, as I mentioned. So what's so interesting about finding ways where you use technology that has an immutable record of our history and our past, which can't be changed based off of authoritarian regimes that may move over time, political issues that may be happening, wars, etc. Code doesn't lie. It's pure fact, unless people find a way to hack it, hopefully. But what's so interesting about this is that it hasn't been. And so that's what we've tried to do using that same concept is we created a concept called proof of patronage, where we take a work of art that's in desperate need of restoration. There'll be a painting with a hole or a scratch in the canvas, and we take a picture of that image, sell it as an NFT at the cost of the restoration of the piece, which by purchasing that NFT, you're actually paying to restore the piece. It's similar to adopting an animal at the zoo. And then 6 to 9 months later, we restore the piece, take people on the journey of restoration, and then they get a second NFT where they see what it looks like after restoration. And so through this concept, we've managed to actually restore 65 different works of art in the collection, which is the most we've done in a single year. But what's so interesting about that is that we're also creating a new philanthropic model to bring people on this journey and become a part of the history of this collection too. These people are going to be tracked as patrons of these different pieces in perpetuity on blockchain.
Yeah.
So with technology, it's all about it's about thinking about it in a clear manner, making a division between the market and technology very often as well. When money gets involved, it gets quite complicated, and it's also been a difficult thing for us because when we talk about blockchain, your thought goes immediately to scam or we're going to take advantage of you in some way, shape, or form. And so that's where the nuances of really understanding what it can bring is so important to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think is really valuable about your approach as well, beyond the fact that you put on 2 absolutely spiffing parties of NF Castle, I'm still hungover from them, despite they were 2 years ago. Sorry, it was a great
informative experience.
Informative experience, exactly. But my favorite point, and please do have a look at that NF Castle. We'll put it under the video, the link, so that people can take a look at what you've done. But my favorite thing about that was the popularization of the technology for the greater public, because I was doing a talk yesterday and I kind of caught myself thinking, oh my God, like this is depressing about being an archaeologist. People keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And with the adoption of technology, like whether that was, the steam engine or electricity, you had the current wars between Edison and Tesla, the electrical wire panic, and basically you're abusing like the general public and them not knowing something, and you're making money out of fear, or you're making money out of a lack of information. One of the most amazing things that you guys did was have the card where basically kids were running around on like a scouting exercise and doing certain things. I obviously joined in as well, and then I got incredibly competitive, and I was like, "Sorry, you got to calm down because these are children, for God's sake." But I got really competitive, like looking at everything. And suddenly, and I was kind of worried about admitting this to you because I was like, yeah, blockchain, no problem, I'll talk about it. I was like, I have no idea what it really is. But you helped me and those children and their families understand through a really simple exercise that by completing an activity in real life, which often also people, sometimes I feel are skeptical towards technology because they feel like, oh, we're still living in the real world, man, and this is also abstract. But connecting the physical world and the digital world, you manage to show people this technology, and so that they can help adopt it.
Absolutely.
And that was a really fantastic moment. Would you mind just saying briefly about that?
Happily.
Tokenization of social behavior. Yeah, I love that.
I think this was another thing which was important to show. So at this conference, Non-Fungible Castle, we created an interactive cultural experience where we implemented technology into the entire experience of going and visiting one of our castles that we're managing. And so we took people on a historic train from Prague to Nelohozovec, just 35 minutes north of Prague, which is that birthplace of Antonín Dvořák. And on the train, we handed out historic newspapers. And we used the opportunity on that train ride to tell people about how this technology could be used. And one thing we gave everyone was a sort of like a credit card, but it represented a wallet or a crypto wallet. Now, one of the biggest barriers to people wanting to collect an NFT or understand how this technology works is they don't want to set up a wallet. They feel like, oh, if I'm taking crypto, this might be uncomfortable. So we created one for them. And on this card, you had a public address, which represented the wallet's location, a QR code, which allowed people to scan that QR code and send you an NFT to that wallet that's on the card, and a secret recovery phrase to get your wallet and actually import it onto your own database, if you wanted to, of wallets, if you so wished, so that you could keep the NFTs that you collected. And so this way, we took away the barriers to entry into actually getting a crypto wallet. And all around this historic site, we created different activities that you could participate in. So you could be fencing, for instance, you would receive an NFT for that experience. You could, for instance, go to a lecture and hear and receive an NFT for that. And what we were trying to prove through that process was show that you can, using blockchain, prove that you were actually attending a certain experience. So one issue we have in this country is that we have politicians that say, for instance, they were involved in the Velvet Revolution, let's say. And there's no way of actually proving whether they were out there in the streets or not. What's interesting is if you could have an NFT that represented you actually being there in that moment. You could scan in or check in for a moment to actually receive that. NFTs could represent your university degree. They could represent a key that let you into a certain space. And so you're creating an immutable moment where you can say, I was actually there in that moment. And then later on, what we did is if you collected enough of these NFTs from these different geocaching kind of experiences, you could scan it, and there was a lockbox we created with a bottle of champagne. And it checks on blockchain whether you have enough NFTs. And if you do, it opens. Now, it's a very simple thing. It's just scans the code, checks your wallet, and yes or no, it sends energy to unlock a magnet that will then allow you to take the bottle of champagne out. But what are the implications of that?
Exactly.
And that's what's so interesting is if you were able to say, it could represent a key card. It could be an airplane ticket that would allow you to go past a barrier. It could be your university degree. It could be proof that you were actually at a certain historic event in time. And this is where we're trying to show those different applications, which was so interesting.
Yeah. So many. I always, like, whenever we talk, I feel like my head's going to explode in the best of ways. That's a huge compliment. But like for like switching to like anthropology now, basically like looking at like history of humanity. You mentioned Mesopotamia. The Mesopotamians actually had real clay wallets that they used to put tokens in, and only if you break that, then like it's like breaking a seal, and like you know that's been kind of tampered with. So humans have spent a huge amount of like evolutionary effort into trying to track kind of interactions, track kind of provenance of communication, track origin of thought, like how many Greek philosophers like killed each other over the fact like whose idea it was first to write about the Republic. You know, Plato was maybe just a very good PR person, which he was. Also, all of his stuff survived. So archaeologically, there's a huge bias towards him. Unlike Diogenes, he just lived naked in a barrel, but he was just, you know, bless him. I might go do the same if civilization is going the way that it is. But one thing I was really thinking about is actually tracking history. And, you know, yesterday we were messaging about Wikipedia and like how you change certain things, like on the articles, tracking the changes that are being made to certain articles that can be, you know, politically sensitive. And I was thinking about the history of fake news. And it's brilliant when you think about, like, for example, Cleopatra and the way that she was portrayed by Octavian, like later Augustus. He needed to take control of Rome, and therefore, obviously, he's going to paint his rival and his mistress in a bad light. But then you look at the films with Elizabeth Taylor and you think that's a bit of fake news that survived for 2,000 years. Yep. Similarly, with the rise of the printing press, you know, one of the things that like, gets my gander up a little bit when people are like, you know, unprecedented with the generative AI, like we will no longer be able to tell truth from lie. And then with the English Civil War, when they had the printing press, what they used to do is print fake proclamations of King Charles and then give them to the undecideds. And there was no way of knowing whether he actually said it or not. Like there was no TV, no way of verification. And that's obviously on a much smaller scale. But what's the difference in principle with generative AI? It's completely the same. So you have really inspired me, and I'm trying to take this now into archaeology and trying to play with the idea. I'll always credit you. No, don't worry on blockchain as an idea.
Only on blockchain.
Exactly, it's proof of thought. Of actually like trying to. This is something that maybe won't save us and our generation, but the generation of our children and the children's children and so on, in terms of actually like making sure that history is recorded properly, including the bad bits, including the good bits, but just as objectively as possible. So I think in that, even when facing the kind of chaos, informational chaos that generative AI is bringing, blockchain can be a super useful tool. And you've pioneered it, you say, on a small thing like opening up a thing with a bottle of champagne in there. But as you say, the implications are huge.
Yeah, I'd say blockchain isn't the be-all, end-all of saving, doing these different things. And I think while I'm fascinated with the technology, I think there are already so many other ways we can engage with that history as well. And retelling, you were just talking about the history from the Roman period as well, that can be completely changed, that we're still propagating to this date. I mean, even now with our own collections, we're looking at how can we curate our spaces so that we tell stories in a way that that may have been heavily male dominated, because you look at the lineage of the eldest male that is really tracking the history of our family very often. But in our curation now, we're completely changing our approach, because very often it was the wives of many of the Lobkowicz princes that were actually achieving these incredible feats. I always mention my 14 times great grandmother. It's Polixena of Berenstein, who would later become the first princess of Lobkowicz. She is really the matriarch of our family, and without which we would be nowhere without her, actually. And she, for instance, is also the person who collected the oldest piece of music that's in our collection. We have a cookbook of her recipes as well, which we've found. We have diary entries and letters where you see the political influence that she had on Europe during this time period. And I think it should be balanced in the sense that it doesn't mean that we have to retell all history, but it means, I think, there's a lot more that we can dig into to uncover these untold stories that really haven't been told yet. And that's with a change of thought and openness as well, which is exciting. So the curation has been quite fun too, because there are these stories that people didn't even know about before, which we've been able to raise. Yeah,
absolutely. And speaking of amazing women, your mum, who the Florescu branch of your family as well is just historically fascinating. Like, again, I'll put a link. It's the history of like Dracula and the Pied Piper and Jekyll and Hyde, and phenomenal stuff from your granddad. But your mum, because she comes from the kind of educational background, is great in terms of doing, for example, like the Young Curator program, and like not just like displaying things, as you say, but saying the stories, and so people can educate themselves through that. So what are your plans in maybe like the educational field, not just like, with the help of blockchain, but generally like digitalization, of helping these objects and these collections that, have been maybe left behind for a period of time to come to life and
education, it lies at the center of everything that we do. And my mother, who both of her parents worked in education. Her father was a professor of history at Boston College, where he wrote the histories of behind different novels as well, looking at the Pied Piper, Frankenstein, and Dracula, and was a specialist in Balkan and Eastern European history. And her mother was a fantastic French teacher as well, and so she's grown up in this background and was trained to was a teacher herself, actually. And to her, she's always been able to test different educational programs on us as kids as well, but she's always looking for ways where students can use different types of skills to dive a little bit deeper into their understanding of history, and letting people also find their own way to educate themselves and learn in their special ways. Some people are more artistically driven. I myself am terrible at drawing, so I find that I can express myself a little bit better through my words rather through my written work and drawings. But What was so interesting about this program she created, the Junior Curator program, the entire concept is that they give students, they break them up into groups, and they give students an object in the collections, and they have to figure out what it is, where they'd place it in the collections, and then give a presentation in front of their parents in the Lobkowicz Palace, where they test their presentation skills.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing when we first hand these objects to the students, they get to touch them, they get to feel them. They're looking for little markings as well. And they're working together as a group to use deductive and inductive reasoning to completely understand how these objects worked and what was their role in society. And very often they'll make discoveries that we didn't even know. We had a game board, for instance, where they had contacted a German game expert to actually figure out exactly all the different use cases for how it's used. And these students, who are around 14 years old, actually were coming up with fantastic discoveries.
It's amazing.
So that program, it's great because it incorporates so many different skills in working with students so that they can understand it better. And now what we're looking at are ways where we can scale that. One of the biggest issues, obviously, with physical objects is they can undergo some forms of damage as well when handled. Obviously, we want to make sure that people get that opportunity to touch and feel them. But again, this is an opportunity where technology can allow us to share these collections with the world without creating physical or financial barriers.
Yeah.
So one thing we're looking at as well in collaboration with the Czech Technical University and along with their research group is around looking at ways where we can scan these objects so that we can put them in a digital environment for closer study, allow them to be put in augmented reality where we could see what that object would look like physically on this table, or find ways to even print it and a 3D model so that students can actually touch and feel that anywhere in the world, and collaborate with one another. So that's, again, this is not a way where technology, yes, not everyone can physically have this experience, but it allows us to scale it in a way where we can connect with so many other people and create such a great impact on all these different students that can be located all around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like one of the great things about like your approach to education, like generally like the House of Lobkowicz, is that you don't kind of sacrifice the physical experience of the culture for the digital, because a lot of the time, like, you know, what you always say amazingly is like, okay, what use is this technology actually going to be? Like, what purpose does it serve? Like, just, it's like we were talking, I think like 2 episodes ago, talking with someone from the banking sector, and he was saying like, it's terrible, for example, the way that our Ministry of Finance has approached digitalizing the tax system. They took a form that was already terrible and just like not a great UX experience and just put it online. That's not digitalization. Like, you've still got a bad process just in digital this time.
Yeah.
And the way that what I love about this approach to culture is that you kind of maintain the experience side of it, but you also enable its dissemination and decentralization to groups of people that might not have the opportunity to go and visit it themselves because they might be immobile, they might be in a different country. One thing that I love is, for example, like using VR in like senior homes, like to give them access to be able to see the model of Strekov, which, you know, we're preparing, even though they might never be able to visit it physically themselves, but also the popularization of your collections around the world, and actually like having someone from Japan or someone from Guatemala be able to look at it. So I'm curious, with, you know, all of this happening and like you're adapting incredibly quickly to the world around you, what are the plans now? What is the strategy? From not necessarily using a particular technology, but what would you like to achieve?
So our plans for the future are at looking at different regions where we've operated historically as a family. Obviously, one of our big goals is the Antonín Dvořák Birth House and bringing that back to life, which will be happening this year. But we're looking at ways of also operating in the Ústí region. We just signed 2 memorandums of understanding, one with Ústecký kraj in the entire region, and the other one with UJEP, which is the school that's the largest school in that region, actually. So we've created academic and regional partnerships in order to look for ways to impact the communities that we work with there. And I think especially in regions outside of Prague, very often culture is centered around the capital cities of many different places. But you also have a lot of different regions that need that cultural excitement and heritage. And that's why we wanted to operate with those people at those institutions. And Rodnica were really looking at wonderful ways to make that castle a lot more accessible to the public. It's unfortunately one of the castles that underwent one of the most difficult periods under Nazism and communism and the most damage, and definitely the one that needs the most work, is the fourth largest castle in the Czech Republic, consisting of 250 rooms over 8 hectares of property. We have to find a way to somehow finance that, but at the same time, look for ways of impacting that community. And so now those partnerships with schools and other groups really allow us to bring it back to life. And it's, especially in these regions, I think, it's culture is the thing that brings a community together. And it's really something that will keep people there, I think, as well, and not want to just go immediately to the capitals, but invest back into the culture that was so rich in those regions before. We didn't rely entirely upon these capital cities in every single country historically. There were regional hubs that were centered around communities that were being put there. So if we can bring that back, I think it will just make a wonderful impact on society here too.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I think, one of the ways that we understand history, which is very skewed. It's like, in Syria, Damascus wasn't all that important. It was Palmyra. That's now, unfortunately, gone due to the war, which is a whole other tragic story. But also, thanks to Reconstruction, we're able to kind of bring it back to life in a certain way. And obviously, like what you're doing, like in the Czech lands that didn't even have the same borders, back in the day, part of the Holy Roman Empire. So the kind of pragocentrism that we see now wasn't necessarily occurring at all. So it's a really nice way of you, and it shows through all the other projects you've been doing, kind of like bringing the community and the culture that is often maybe people feel it can be kind of elitist or distant behind a kind of like glass case, like literally as it is in museums, and you're kind of bringing all of that to life. Like,
but it's also taking pride in where you're from.
Absolutely.
And this is one thing that drives me crazy, and especially in the Czech Republic now, a lot of people have such a negative association with this region of Ústí and the city there. And it's such a rich cultural hub in this country for the things that were happening. Ústí in particular was, people went to Střekov, and Goethe, who was writing from there, said this is the most beautiful view in all of Central Europe. That's coming from this place. There are unfortunately things that have happened in history that have led to damage in that region, but it doesn't mean that we don't have that historical narrative that we need to bring out.
Exactly.
And instead of creating this negativity around different areas and saying, oh, this isn't the right place for me, or I need to go somewhere else where I can develop something there and bring something back to that community and bring it back to that same glory that it was once there before,
absolutely.
Which I think can be even bigger than anything. Like, my ambition is to create things that are bigger than things in Prague, as sort of a central area.
Yes.
But and then you're inspiring people who are growing up there to then say, wow, I can be proud of where I'm from. And this is for anywhere in the world, wherever you're from as well. You should be proud of the place you're from.
Absolutely. And trust me, the inspiration is working, because I'm already sizing up properties around Rodnica so that I can be a part of this cultural digital hub around Říp, which, for those of you who are not Czech, is a kind of Czech ancestral mountain where Father Czech kind of came to. So it's not just, about the castle, it's the community and the landscape around it, and, kind of bringing that.
It's the heart of this country.
Exactly. And you mentioned the Antonín Dvořák Birth House. Again, all of these links will be under the video, so because there's such a richness of all these projects, like you'll have
too much.
You'll have a bibliography to read through. But I think the story of Antonín Dvořák is a beautiful one, how from, very humble or small beginnings can come something huge, where your symphony's played when the first man lands on the moon. And I'm just wondering, in that context, you as William, obviously, like you're, fantastically organized, you're like helping to run this organization. And it's a lot of like day-to-day, very kind of like hard kind of administrative work as well. But you as Will, what drives you? Why the culture? Because you're a geek is one of the reasons why we're friends. Like we love this. So what importance does it have to you?
Well, I mean, looking at the story of Antonín Dvořák, I think it's a source of inspiration for a lot of people and a source of national pride, but also pride as a humanity and as a society. How this young boy who grew up the son of a butcher ended up, who grew up in this town of Nelahozoves as a kid and listened to all these things that surrounded him, the birds that were in the trees, the sound of the first railroads that were being built right next door to his home, the river that was flowing right by. This sort of connection to that place and this all these things that inspired him eventually are what he took and used to create the wonderful symphonies that we know today. And I think his story is one that's greatly inspiring, not just to musicians, but to people all around the world, where if you're able to actually stop and listen, and this is what Dvořák told his students as well. He just said, don't listen to me or don't learn from me, but listen to the things that are around you and use that to inspire your music as well. You really will be able to do wonderful things. And that's the thing that you can take from your place. And what drives me very often in the work that I do is, and this is what Dvořák did when he put together his own music. He took inspiration of the place that he was from and the culture and the society that he was from. And this is why I think culture is so important to protect. When people say, you know, what makes me who I am today? What makes me the individual that I am? It's culture. It's your family, it's your history, it's the society you grew around, it's the music you heard, it's the way you interacted with people. And that's why it's the most important thing, I think, to protect. Yeah. And today, the first thing that's cut, whenever there's a crisis, COVID or whatever it is, it's culture. And it should be the complete opposite. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't have to be high forms of culture. I'm not saying that we have to be listening to Beethoven and Dvořák every single day, and that's the only thing we should protect. Yeah. But you should also be supporting new contemporary forms of art and culture. And if I think about what my ancestors were doing too, yes, they were patrons of Beethoven, but Beethoven was a complete rebel during his time period as well. Yeah. He added a third French horn in the performance of the Eroica Symphony, which was seen as blasphemous. You would never do such a thing. Complete rebel. Yeah. Dvořák, he was a rebel as well. Mozart. Yeah, absolute rebels too. And we forget these people, to this date, the longest applause that has ever been heard in Carnegie Hall is the result of Dvořák playing his New World Symphony. I mean, you've had like modern performers like the Rolling Stones be there. The longest applause ever is Dvořák, who came from this town, this small town, just outside of Prague, and reached world heights. And that is and his New World Symphony is what Neil Armstrong chose to take to the moon as a representation of our society in case he ever met any extraterrestrial life. I mean, that's incredible. Yeah. So I think that's why we protect culture today. We share these stories, we protect them for generations to come, and we help people find inspiration in their own lives so that they can go on to do wonderful things as well. Yeah. Otherwise, this is just stuff. Yeah. And we'd like to find ways to make it applicable in our society today.
Well, you have summarized. You should do these podcasts instead of me because you have summarized it so beautifully, and it's one of the reasons I love you dearly as a friend as well, because it's exactly why I love archaeology, why I love history, is protecting these stories and learning from them, and also just enjoying them, because we're not on this rock for a very long time, and as you say, without the story and the context, it is just stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, that was William Rudolf Lobkowicz from the House of Lobkowicz, which is what we're going to put on his name, but he's so much more than that. He's a phenomenal friend and a great guy, and please do support. I know that you didn't ask me to say this, but go on their social websites, share the stories, go have a look at the exhibitions, because they're absolutely fantastic. So that's not Will trying to worm in there. That's me saying that proactively, just so you know. William, thank you so much. I wish you all the best, and with our research group, at least the small part that I hope to contribute is to help you digitalize the lot of stuff that you have, and we'll try the best to make that work and have fun along the way. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys later. So please, I hope that you enjoyed, and see you at the later episode. Take care. Bye.